each one of us will have sent up a prayer for the rescue of the workers trapped in the Silkyara Bend Barcode Tunnel. As the massive rescue effort reaches them, we shall be very grateful that they have all been rescued.
Officials involved in the rescue missions say they're now planning to cut through the debris manually. 41 workers have been trapped since November 12th after a landslide caused a portion of the tunnel they were building to collapse.
And the rescue operations continue to pull out 41 workers who remain trapped under the debris in Silkyara Tunnel.
The drilling machine is trying to get close to those laborers who are stranded there. Then the plan also includes parallel tunnels or parallel drillings.
It doesn't happen often. The huge mountain, that tunnel that crashed, sort of sheltered them. It doesn't happen too often. But very soon, as this tragedy moves on to history, lakhs of people will be traveling that road. Many of them will be peering inside to see just what happened. India is building infrastructure at a massive rate: bridges, railway lines, ports, airports. What happens to safety? What is the way safety is looked at? And that is what we examine in this issue of On Point. Let me start with the story, and this is a real one. It happened to me long years ago. I was in Odisha at that time. Odisha is regularly invaded by massive cyclones. The cyclones that come from the Bay of Bengal have huge destructive capacity. So that night, I was in this government dak bungalow in one corner of Odisha, but pretty near the coast. And what happened is that throughout the night, as the cyclone raged, I was staying alone, as I said, in that two-room dak bungalow, small affair, quiet place up on a hill. By early morning, I heard a huge explosion. It was really like a bomb going off near you. It was a massive sound, and in the deafening quietness, it was like it ricocheted all over. So I opened the door and came out to see what had happened. Well, what had happened is that there was this huge banyan tree next to this dak bungalow, and that banyan tree had fallen, it had been uprooted in the cyclone, and it fell straight across one of the rooms. There were two rooms, as I said. So I was sleeping in one room. That other room was not existing anymore. The banyan tree had simply smashed through that roof. Now, I was lucky that it was alive. I was very, very lucky that night to have escaped. The tree could have fallen on any one of the rooms. So, that takes me to Odisha cyclones very soon. And we have heard about the super cyclone, which took an enormous toll of human lives. But after that, Odisha learnt a lesson, and despite a cyclone hitting it at an average of one every year, there's been hardly any deaths in cyclones. These are massive evidence of what safety can do, and safety, if it is, as I started my story by saying, that when the safety wasn't there, I could have been a victim. But this time, over 2 decades, the Odisha government has been able to put in place safety measures which has ensured that no matter what is the impact of the cyclones, the loss of human lives is minimal. But it doesn't always happen that way. Look at the recent Odisha train accident, which took a gruesome toll of lives. So what's happening here? It is essentially the presence or the absence of safety mechanisms and regular systems for those safety which determine whether people will live to tell the tale, or else we shall see one or more of these tragedies unfolding, especially, as I said, since India is now rapidly constructing roads, buildings, bridges all over the place. But as this study of mine shows, safety does not excite people except after tragedies. Now, in the case of these tunnels, how much is the cost of safety? Not more than 2% of the total project cost. Companies will always be racing for profits. Whose job is it to ensure that in that race they do not cut costs? It is a job of the regulators. In the case of buildings, it is the RERA. In the case of highways, it is the job of NHAI. In the case of railways, actually we don't have a regulator, but it's a ministry, and that is where there's a major weakness there. In the case of electricity, it is the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. In the case of gas, it is the Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board. But the point is, the bottom line is, they have to ensure that costs include the safety margin. It must be shown clearly. Now, why is it that regulators do not show it? One obvious answer is they're scared politically because of the political clout of companies. But is that the truth? I would differ here. That doesn't answer. Regulators, mind you, are also very powerful political persons. They don't need to be, they often are not scared of companies not being able or not putting up a front that cost. Then why does this happen? Two reasons. And one of those is that the public doesn't often goad them on. When there's a crisis, we all band around, but very soon that's forgotten. Let me give an example. Some years ago, crash test of many cars in India showed that they did not satisfy the standards. What happened? Did the sale of those cars go down? Did this make the companies move on? Well, it did, but after a lot of effort, and frankly what happened is there was a blowback not only by the companies, but which is expected, but also by the public, saying that we're fine. I mean, whoever has seen a crash, this is what leads to what in economics I would call the price of safety. Safety is the price that a person or a society pays a priori for building it or not building it. So if you are not building the safety factors, or basically you are showing an absence, then there's going to be a cost that has to be paid, and that cost will be in terms of the human lives. The economics of safety consists in pricing it or compensating its absence to produce, and I'm reading from here, an economically optimal amount of safety at socially optimal resource cost. What does that mean? Take the example of a very famous case of Titanic. What happened there? There was safety mechanisms built in, but the cost of what would be the impact was not adequately factored in, and that is what led to the horrible tragedy. Whether in the case of many other cases where, for instance, the recent Morbi Bridge collapse, where about 141 people died, or in the case of other major safety misses. This is what often happens here or abroad. But here the risks rise. And why do the risks rise? Because we are building a huge amount of infrastructure projects. And wherever the projects are going to be of a higher cost because of the terrain involved, the tendency is to cut that extra amount of what is called the safety mechanism. Let me give an example from tunnels itself. Now, tunnel experts say there are usually two ways in which to build a tunnel. One is known as the earth pressure balancing machine. Now, as this name suggests, it's a painstaking system where there's a sort of a drilling machine that keeps on boring through the tunnel, but what it does at every stage is that it sort of keeps the pressure intact of the surrounding so that there's no cave in. The other one, which is the drilling and blasting one, is slightly cheaper, and it's the name is New Austrian Tunnel Method. Now here you're blasting and digging into a hillside. It's faster and therefore gives results, and typically when a company is trying to reach a particular destination fast, this is what will happen. But what happens is that in this method, often when you are building a tunnel, you need to create the pillars, or rather keep provisions for pillars so that the weight doesn't collapse. But if you keep those pillars, when you're trying to blast through, many of those pillars may not actually survive, or you're actually sort of compromising. Now realize what could have happened in the Silkyara Bend Barcode tunnel. This is where the problem comes along. Let me give an example from the famous Atal tunnel. The Atal tunnel has been a marvel of engineering. It has been done very well. The company which did this tunnel found that when they were digging the tunnel, when they were cutting through the hillside, there was a huge water body on top. Now they could have simply said that we let it go. I mean, there's a water body there and we simply cut it through. But what it did was they incurred an additional cost. They created a nala to drain out that entire water. It was a considerable amount of water, and the expenditure was not sort of thought of previously. But what it did was it made the Atal tunnel safe. The cost went up. It's cost about 3,200 crore. Now that is the price that one pays. But that is where the prudence shows up in terms of the results obtained. Now the rule is that construction companies have to appoint an external auditor and an internal auditor, and these audits are supposed to happen about twice a year to see that the standards have been maintained. The construction safety standards in India are a direct import from the British Construction Standards of 2019. We haven't even written our own manual. Have you or anyone ever found reports of these coming out anywhere? Does the regulator put up these reports on their website? It doesn't. That's a problem. If the public is not involved, made a party to those lapses or good efforts, both can happen, then how does the constituency for safety get built up? It is not, as I said, a political question. It's a question of, again, a regulatory lapse, and which keeps on happening. For instance, we talk about the vigilance organizations, the government vigilance organizations, CVC, the CAGs, the state level vigilance organizations. Does anybody ever say that yes, a particular additional cost is acceptable? It needs to be done because there is a safety factor involved. I haven't heard about it. In my so many years of journalism, I've never ever heard them saying that this additional cost was necessary. So you can see which ways the balance lies. It's in the interest of the companies to show they have cut costs. It's in the interest of the regulators to show that they have held on to the bottom line of low cost. And it's in the interest of the auditors to show that they have tamped down heavily on excessive costing. So who loses out? Well, my submission is, it is we ourselves who lose out. And this is a problem that needs to be understood very carefully. So the economics of safety, as we said, is to price it in a way which is socially optimal. Now, if the society, in this case the Indian society, says that that is optimal for us, that is the social cost that we shall take, then there's no point cavilling about accidents like this. Those would happen. We can look at Japan, for instance. Japan says resilient infrastructure despite earthquakes happening so regularly. And that's another thing. In India, especially in northern India, the frequency of earthquakes have risen quite sharply. We don't know, and we just don't want to think about those. But the point is, again, the keyword safety comes along. I look at the example of Orissa, I look at the example of Japan, and I realize that in our society, it is not difficult to bring in safety in the face of disasters if the people want it, if the political structure wants it, if the regulators want it. Otherwise, crazy accidents like this will tend to happen. When we travel in a plane or in a ship, have you ever wondered at the number of redundant safety measures that twice, 3 times, 4 times safety equipment for everyone, so that if any equipment fails, there's a backup to a backup, and so on, which is what makes those means of transport so safe? It's this question that we need to think about in the wake of this Tunnel X tragedy, and that is what we wanted to discuss in this issue of On Point. For a detailed description of what we discussed here, please visit my Substack. The link is in the description below. Thank you.